Do you ever get buyer's remorse? I mean, it's a pretty universal experience in watch collecting, right? See, I tried to bond with the Santos Medium, but after a few months, I just noticed that I was wearing it less and less. And so the search inevitably began again because it's not a cheap watch, and I just didn't feel like it was the right Cartier for me. Now, I'm happy to report that I think I might have found the best Santos ever made. No, not this. This is the new Salmon Dial Orient Bambino. That's next week's video. Hey guys, I'm Max and this is WatchCrunch. So I've noticed the pattern. I will buy a watch, really get into the brand and the older models, then I will realize that there's a different reference I like better. Then I have to do the swap, usually losing money in the process. Now, if you want to avoid that mistake, you can always download the WatchCrunch app, skip to the front of the line by polling the community and letting them guide you onto the righteous path. Watching my Santos Medium video from like 6 months ago, you can kind of tell between the lines I was really trying to convince myself that it was the right purchase. There were many things to love with the medium modern Santos, not least of which is the proportions. 35 millimeters wide, 41 lug to lug with a square shape meant that it pocketed itself perfectly between the two bones of my wrist while still holding a great stance because of the industrial, almost brutalist design cues. But because it's only 10 millimeters tall with the integrated bracelet, the whole thing just melts into you. It's one of the most comfortable watches I've worn all day long. But the first problem that I was aware of, I never fully came around on, was the bezel treatment on the new Santos. They had kind of stretched the polish all the way down to the bracelet. And it feels like sometimes manufacturers need to change things just for the sake of change. Like when they took away the 4 rounded taillights of the Corvette, it's just not the same car to me anymore. To me, the square bezel is synonymous with the Santos, and as much as I try to convince myself otherwise, every time I looked down, all I saw was the acre of high polish staring back at me like a mirror. After some gentle wear, you bet it picks up a lot of scratches. This is not a watch for the OCD because it's gonna get scratched up. The only hope is that you don't get any deep gouges, that it develops like an even coating of scratches over time. But out of all the models that Cartier makes, I still like the Santos most. See, the line goes all the way back to 1911, named after Alberto Santos Dumont, the dapper son of rich Brazilian coffee farmers who took to the skies in his homemade dirigibles. Yeah, rich guys with flying things, it's nothing new. Louis Cartier was commissioned to make a watch that could be worn on the wrist instead of in the pocket for quick glances while airborne, and there the world's first pilot watch was born. I was not only drawn to that storyline, but also I wanted to stick with a sportier Cartier, since the brand has a strong bent towards formality, being the jewelers to the kings and all, and I didn't want the funky models like the Ballon Bleu or the Crash. Not that I can afford the latter, I still wanted a quintessential square Cartier. Now you're gonna ask, what about the Tank? I agree. The Tank is as classic as it gets. I've reviewed the Tank Solar Beat most recently. I loved it. It was a darling of a watch, but frankly, I got bored pretty quickly with it. I felt like you put on a Tank because it's the Cartier to wear, and you don't really have to think about it. I mean, that's kind of what Andy Warhol said after all, right? The Tank is the go-to Cartier if you just want an iconic design that even like non-watch people will recognize. But I do want to think about the watches I wear. I want to think for myself. I don't want like the most obvious one. Plus, the Tank didn't come with a bracelet. That's another highlight of the Santos that really adds a whole other visual element to the watch. Researching the Santos, I came across Galb's from the 90s, and it was love at first sight. It had everything I wanted in a Santos and more. See, as Cartier evolved the Santos line in the 70s, we had the Carré, what many considered to be the first modern Santos. It featured that classic Art Deco design, but was also quite blocky and unrefined by today's standards. Everything was right angles. The watch just felt a bit kind of jagged and harsh. In the 90s, with the help of better manufacturing techniques and also the trend was towards like more roundedness, we got the Galb, which literally means curved in French. And that's exactly what they did. Everything about the watch, the case, the bracelet links, even the sapphire crystal had a gentle radius machined into it. And finally, I felt like visually this watch had achieved a certain balance, between the industrialness of exposed screw heads, the harsh angles, contrasted with the way that it just gently molded to your anatomy. The bracelet on this later reference 2319 is pure joy. It's brushed with the polished screw heads, but it also features a disappearing double folding clasp. This sacrifices a bit of practicality for looks because you can only add or subtract full links to get the right fit, but it's a trade-off I will take any day. This reference is also the medium size back then, which is just 29 millimeters wide. Yeah, it's a bit dainty by modern standards, but square watches tend to wear bigger than stated. And if any brand is to get away with smallish watches, it would be Cartier. Plus, if you have a significant other, it's a very unisex size that can be worn by a variety of wrist sizes. They did make an XL version at 32 millimeters, and that would have been the obvious choice for me, but that one loses the guilloche dial. And also, look at the treatment on the date window for the XL. If you don't see a problem here and you think this is perfectly fine, then we're not friends. Speaking of guilloche dials, this really is the cherry on top for this model. Guilloche is the technique where fine engravings are carved into a watch dial in repetitive patterns as to yield a unique three-dimensional texture. And it just does unspeakably dirty things with the light. The silver guilloche radiates out from the center, draws your eyes in, and is only interrupted by a small, inconspicuous date window at the 3. Now I finally understand why you don't need to set the time on your Cartier to enjoy wearing it. Okay, but there's another Santos to consider, right? The Santos Dumont. Yeah, I know, the naming conventions escape me too, but I reviewed the Dumont last year. It was quite a beautiful piece, but it's just a little too dressy for my lifestyle, you know, being the rugged outdoorsman that I am. And also, it didn't come with a bracelet either, which disqualified it from my list. With the Dumont, you had to settle for quartz unless you went with the XL, which I think was built for rock Dwayne Johnson's wrist. In contrast, my Galb runs an automatic mechanical movement, and this is mind-boggling. This small watch with the 8mm thin case has a legit mechanical movement with a spinning rotor in there. So after handling like a dozen Cartiers, buying 2 or 3 different Santoses, Santi, I finally settled on this one. Did I make the right choice? Time will tell. That's the tricky bit of this hobby, isn't it? Our constant shifting, finicky taste. So I don't consider this buyer's remorse. It's just not a good way to look at it. I consider this tuition paid to the watch gods so that I may hope to briefly experience moments of watch ecstasy. But what's your favorite Cartier model? Do you struggle as much as I do with this brand? Let's chat more on WatchCrunch. Also check out our new green Horween leather Zero Pass straps that we just did for St. Patrick's Day coming up at anachronist.shop. All right, guys, see you in the next one.